Welcome back. This is the continuation of a previous video. I recommend watching that one first to understand why I am critiquing a mode that no longer exists. But with that, we are back in the Somme Noir, revisiting one of Wuthering Waves' most iconic and beloved events, the depths of Illusive Realm. To be fair, I will also be critiquing the new replacement mode, Dreaming Deep, as both modes can offer unique gameplay and thus deserve their own critiques. Before I get into the fixes regarding version 1.4 Depths of Illusive Realm, I want to point out the issues with Dreaming Deep. Dreaming Deep is here to stay, and I greatly appreciate the intent behind the mode, so I would like to see it further optimized and improved to better deliver on that intended vision. First and foremost, the game mode can take too long. This was a common complaint when it first launched. However, I believe the quality of life updates in version 2.5 were built on misconception and incorrect assumptions regarding the player base's concerns. The issue is not the length. Players happily sit down for 2 to 4 hour quests whenever new MSQ drops. The storytelling and presentation of MSQ is amazing. Additionally, the vocal minority of players often complain of dry periods or limited content, so having more is not an issue. It is therefore the why it is so long that is the issue. This is further compounded by the requirement to do it multiple times for alternate endings. Reading through the same dialogue several times can be exhausting. However, Kuro Games clearly wants this mode to be story-driven, to deliver lore regarding the Somme Noir, or potentially subconscious lore regarding the rover's past. That remains to be seen. I can tell because their recent quality of life, to streamline the game mode was to reduce the number of combats by auto-clearing anything that is under level. This reduces the already limited interactiveness of this game mode, making it extremely text-heavy. One simple, although very work-intensive fix would be to alter the presentation from movie scripts to rough storyboard sketches. To push us even further, when we transition into combat, there could be a cool animation that goes from storyboard sketches to a fully rendered rover in combat. Then, once the combat starts, automatically intro into the player's main resonator. It would be best to have a few of these transitions to keep it fresh, as the animation in Peaks of Prestige got really stale, even though it was an exceptional animation that I thoroughly enjoyed. This story-based presentation would also help fix the confusing text, because Brock can't read, and having all the names highlighted in the same color does not help. Who says what? I couldn't tell ya. Replacing script-like presentation with storyboard presentation and speech bubbles would make the presentation both more engaging and increase clarity while embracing the film festival's aspect. This is just a suggestion though, as the devs are way more experienced than I am, but the mode's story presentation does need to be more engaging. In order to cut down on playtime without sacrificing the story, Kuro Games also increased Rover's animation speed across the board. This was a great idea. However, I think it is missing another underlying issue. Players are able and encouraged to fully explore the board every run, since there are rewards tied to fully exploring each board. Walking around the whole board to complete all side quests drastically increases playtime. However, if we know anything about side quests, they completely ruin the balance of the final objective. This is something that Depths of Illusive Realms and Thousand Gateways does better than the Dreaming Deep, as there are no side quests and the linearity preserves the game balance as the player progresses. The player either outscales the mode by optimizing their build well, or they don't. One potential fix for Dreaming Deep to combat this side quest issue is the introduction of film roll cost per block moved. This would force more linear play and then encourage players to come back to explore blocks they couldn't last time. Slowly, players would become more powerful each run as they can make decisions on which side quests to grab as they reveal more of the board, all while pursuing the alternate endings. If the player runs out of film reels, just teleport them to the next main storybook block and continue. This would also ensure that each run is new and fresh, as shrouded areas of the board are revealed with our limited film reels. In all honesty, I was under the misconception that this was how the film reels were used when I first played this mode. After all, if I spend aimless time filming myself walking around, it still eats up film. Importantly, instead of just increasing the number of film reels in the film theory, I also think it would be better to unlock a limited number of placeable portals on every map, such as the one in the Black Shore movie. These portals should only be placeable in revealed areas. That way, the player can shorten the distance between certain areas previously discovered without increasing the total film reels and landing us back at the same side quest problem when future movies drop and we have the film theory maxed out. For the final point on reducing game mode time, allow us to walk through interactions that do not require any choice on our part. For instance, here I am unable to progress to the common battle event because there are some dream fragments in the way. What purpose does requiring me to click on this square serve? Nothing. A big part of reducing fatigue, and thus apparent length, in any game mode would be to reduce the number of clicks or taps that disrupt the game flow. Unless a block or interaction requires the player's choice, then just autoplay or run through it, automatically collecting the dream fragments. For instance, after the common battle, I had to go through 4 clicks to progress, each with their own animation times. 1 click to confirm obtaining Baichi and the dream fragments, 1 click to choose her ability modifier, this one was necessary, 1 click to confirm that the bond level is increased, and finally 1 click to confirm that the new level of synergy burst was active. The clicks add up. Also, since ability modifiers currently don't have any impact in this game mode, it felt like 4 completely unnecessary clicks and animation times. Taking this all together, plus the auto-clearing low-level combat QL, the game mode has essentially devolved into a clicking through menus game, more than a story-based interactive combat movie. The original vision needs to be brought back. Reduce the number of non-combat clicks and animations. Considering the above example with Baichi, simply show indicators on the side of the screen that communicate what resonator was obtained, how many dream fragments, and if a new bond level was achieved, show the bond icon with an up arrow. If I care what new bond buffs I have active, I can go look for myself, but at some point I will have these all memorized. Additionally, since we have to select the ability modifications, let us go through these selections, if we care to, in the resonator menu. If we recruit a currently active resonator though, then have us make the selection at the time of recruitment, since we probably care. Beyond game length, there are also issues with the core mechanics that affect game balance. I touched on one point above, ruining game balance with the abundant and easily accessible side quests. This game balance is made even worse once the film theory is maxed out, starting the player 25 levels above the first interaction, making basically everything that isn't a boss or surprise combat immediately skipped. In roguelike modes, the persistent global passives, in this case from film theory, are supposed to help with RNG, so the player can achieve these broken combinations more reliably, not bringing up the power floor. A higher power floor completely ruins the delicate balance of roguelike modes that aim to start a run at a challenging level that progressively gets more difficult, where the player must outpace the exponentially increasing difficulty within that one run. Another aspect of inadequate game balance is the team system. As I've mentioned before, players want their actions to have impact. In the same vein, if a mechanic exists, it should have a purpose. However, I often forget that I have slot 2 and 3 resonators, as they are completely irrelevant in combat. Typically, they are just there to activate my bond synergy. I am also unimpressed by their concerto intros. Triggering these backup characters just activates their resonance liberations, which makes some characters strictly better than others as supports. What would be nice is if we can select what the non-main resonator would do when triggering their concerto effect, be that cast their liberation, cast their skill, or trigger their intro and then outro. For instance, Carlotta's skill would be much more useful than her liberation as a non-main resonator, as it provides good crowd control, or, alternatively, her enhanced heavy to apply a glacio debuff. If non-main resonators have multiple stage liberations, or skills, they should automatically trigger the follow-ups as well, such as again with Carlotta's skill and liberations. Honestly, what is surprising is that these resonators aren't on the field fighting with the player like they were in the Somnoir Labyrinth, when Synergy Burst is adapted from the Somnoir Labyrinth's Dreamlink. Finally, considering team mechanics, it is incohesive that there are only 5 modifications total for each resonator. Forget about optimizing your main resonator for a particular playstyle, as discussed in my last video. Since backup resonators are limited to only casting their liberations, or part of it, 3 to 4 of the 5 modifications do absolutely nothing. What would feel more cohesive is if there were more than 5 modifications for each character, and we could choose up to 5 to specialize the non-main resonators as support characters. Again, players want their actions to have impact. Most decisions in Dreaming Deep currently have no impact, not exactly because they are poorly designed, but because they are poorly balanced. So it can be difficult to understand what the vision for this game mode truly was. If I misinterpreted its vision, then I apologize. Perhaps I am completely wrong, and having only 5 ability modifications per resonator is fine, because the point of this mode is to make use of more resonators, swapping resonators around to respond to varied threats. If that is the case, then I feel the option to select what ability is activated when introing non-main resonators is vital. Additionally, new mechanics need to be added that encourage the use of different main resonators for different combat matchups. I generally don't like making criticism without trying to offer a solution. While offering our heartfelt and thoughtful analysis on why something doesn't feel good is already a huge boon to developers, I personally feel suggestions can help further contextualize what headspace I am in and what the actual problem is, hence why I've made several suggestions above. I trust the devs to not just implement what I say word for word, because I have no idea what I'm talking about, but rather deconstruct the core principles of my critique and then improve the game to quell these worries. With that, I will make a suggestion that may be controversial, but I feel could be added to encourage swapping main resonators between battles. Namely, add various Somme Noir shields that are weak to different damage types. For instance, a stone shield could be weaker to heavy attack damage, while the energy shield is weaker to liberation damage. There could be an acoustic shield that is weaker to skill damage, and finally a sand shield or something that is weaker to basic attack damage. I do not know exactly what lore physics of the world would truly match which shield to which damage type. However, the key here is weaker, not only weak. For instance, the stone shield could take a base 1.0x damage from all damage types, but takes 1.2 to maybe 1.5x damage from heavy attack damage. This damage is calculated based on the number of attacks made against the shield, attacks being button inputs, that dealt that damage type. This is important for 2 reasons. 1. All characters can deal all damage types, although to varying degrees of effectiveness. And 2. It doesn't hard lock certain resonators from competing, preserving player autonomy. These reasons are why I wouldn't recommend making the same shield system for the different attributes, or for the damage actually dealt, since we are at a point where resonators are focused heavily on one damage type, dealing effectively none of the other damage types, resulting in the same problem as the attributes. Such shields would completely lock out certain resonators and brick a run if you don't already have one such resonator recruited. The above approach would encourage swapping of main resonators, as each encounter would have only one of the above shield types, and thus leave the wider array of aforementioned ability modifiers for Depths of Illusive Realms, which I will now critique. Depths of Illusive Realm. It's been a long time, but luckily enough, I wrote a lot about this back when it was still around. Depths of Illusive Realm was my favorite mode at the time, and I wanted to see it continue to improve and thrive. There are 3 main topics I will cover. 1. Turning it into permanent, refreshing content. 2. Quality of life improvements. And 3. Balance improvements. As a point of reference, I believe Vampire Survivors and Inkbound are 2 great example roguelike games that I personally played. How can we convert Depths of Illusive Realm into refreshing content? And why even bother? The old versions of Illusive Realms and their story are now gone, making the Somme Noir story incoherent to new players, as they now start directly from When the Night Knocks with the Somme Noir Labyrinth, which at the time was tied directly into version 1.4 of Illusive Realms. I remember back when I cleared the Somme Noir Labyrinth that I had no idea what was happening story-wise until I went over to the Illusive Realms and did the 1.4 version story. Then, everything I had already done made perfect sense. Therefore, retroactively make all previous Illusive Realms permanent. Allow players to play through the previous versions for its story and to obtain previous version rewards like Phantom Echoes and Asteroids. This would ensure new players, such as those on the PS5, Steam, Mac, Alexa, heck smart fridges, still have access to the 4-cost echoes and weapon projections. More importantly, this keeps the Illusive Realms story congruent and coherent. Once a previous version is complete, remove it from the game files. Although, put the dialogue in the gallery, please. Lastly, keep a generic, refreshing version of Illusive Realms between Illusive Realms story updates. Recharge the rewards, accept the sold-out Phantom Echo and weapon projections in the later part of Phase 2 of each patch, so players have something to look forward to in this generally dry period. Any new Illusive Realms story will need to be another permanent version that players play through before catching up and gaining access to the generic refreshing version. Dreaming Deep as an Illusive Realms replacement now restricts Kuro Games' storytelling for the Somme Noir. Bringing back Illusive Realms opens an alternate route for storytelling. If Kuro Games ever has a story idea that doesn't fit in the Dreaming Deep's film festival aesthetic, they can present it in the Illusive Realms. However, if we make Illusive Realms a permanently refreshing mode, what can be added to put the fresh in refreshing? Because Illusive Realms is a roguelike, it doesn't necessarily have fixed enemies it can rotate through, like in Tower of Adversity or Whimpering Wastes. However, new characters, their metaphors, and companion quest boss arenas could be potential new content. Each new character will add new content as they will be featured as a limited time trial character, such as in versions past, and perhaps these can be rotated or featured again during rerun banners. This would be a great marketing strategy. If Kuro Games decides to bring back companion quests, which were quests that focused on developing a specific Resonator's personality and story, then aspects of their sonorospheres could be reused for those battle arenas. Additionally, I think it would be cool if the items we receive from companion quests are implemented into the Illusive Realms as metaphors or tokens for those characters, such as with Jeju's painting, the Serenity of Xiehua Village. These should be unlocked only after completing the corresponding companion quest, and perhaps add the character to the trial roster for a limited time if completed off-banner. Additionally, to keep the game mode fresh, we can use Illusive Realms as a testbed for new mechanics, which is inherently fresh. If Kuro Games ever wants to test new mechanics, they can throw them in here as limited time visiting metaphors to see how the players react. As mentioned before, I believe negative statuses would have profited from a public beta such as this. It would have given the community time to discuss the mechanics and their hope and worries regarding them before they were finalized. Now, for quality of life improvements for Depths of Illusive Realms. First, what are quality of life improvements for? The point of a game is to have fun. Crazy concept, I know. Quality of life is there to ensure fun is had by reducing unintended, unnecessary, or purposeless friction. Part of reducing unnecessary friction is properly and seamlessly communicating information the player needs to engage with the game. For instance, one major Illusive Realms issue was the lack of accessibility to upgrade information mid-run. Therefore, we need to add improved UI to view what upgrades have been obtained and their effects within a run. Dreaming Deep does this much better than the old Illusive Realms, however, I feel there is still room for improvement. For instance, adjust the Resonator upgrade screen so that the ability modifiers obtained from the memory of training are represented as branching nodes off of a skilled tree, or I guess in this case an ability tree. Gray out the ability nodes not obtained in this run, but still allow us to read what they do for planning purposes, and highlight the ones that are currently active. However, if the upgrade hasn't been obtained before, leave it as question marks. This will add a sense of progression as players run through the mode repeatedly, building their information compendium. This concept is shown in Dreaming Deep with its metaphors. However, I don't believe there needs to be any material rewards tied to discovering them all. Although, if there has to be a reward, maybe have it unlock a super rare ability modification for that specific Resonator to be used going forward, tying the reward directly to the gameplay. Additionally, provide the ability to read character abilities and active resonance chain during the run with the modified effects listed underneath. This will provide players with more information to understand what exactly these characters are capable of within a run. If we really want to get fancy, maybe even have prerequisite upgrades to even more interesting ability modifiers, like a skill tree that goes on and on and on. But maybe we can talk about that after 4.x. Another quality of life issue is limited control over run difficulty. To fix this, I would add the ability to toggle on or off purchase buffs from the Thought Evolution store, in case you want some of the later buffs, but not all of the earlier buffs. For example, I want metaphor refreshes, as that reduces RNG within a run, but maybe not defense and HP boosts, because that makes the mode too easy, raising the power floor, which, as aforementioned, I believe is an issue. These persistent buffs are a particular problem for the current Dreaming Deep. The level boosts trivialize the game mode, even if auto-clearing quality of life was removed. Additionally, ensure mimetic tuning is a permanent part of the Illusive Realms going forward. This will allow for player autonomy over run difficulty. Another small issue, but impactful one, is the ability to track personal progress or global progress. Therefore, add the ability to check past runs of each level. We previously received a summary of our run's performance at the end of each run, the same as in Dreaming Deep. However, it would be nice to see all past runs in the menu somewhere. For instance, characters used, ratings, and active buffs or thought evolutions. Perhaps add graphs summarizing performance trends. Tracking one's performance can in of itself be a motivator to continue playing. Additionally, add the ability to view best global clears for each level, similar to popular teams in TOA, showing popular teams, best performing teams, or average clear time teams. Since Illusive Realms normalizes characters' stats, this would be the best mode to actually make these comparisons, as no weapon refinements, wave bands, or echo stats would skew these recommendations or comparisons, such as they do in other modes. The final quality of life issue I have is that the metaphor wording was confusing and misleading. There was inconsistent or unspecific wording, especially for conditional triggers. Several examples being, while in mid-air, damage is increased by 20% for 5 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. What triggered this? Do I just need to jump 5 times, or attack 5 times in the air? Do I gain 1 stack every 1 second while in the air? Do these stacks go away if I land, or are they permanent? These can all be determined through testing, but this should be communicated and not left to the player to figure out. Another one is, Echo Skill increases crit damage by 80% for 15 seconds. Is this triggered on hit or on cast or usage of an Echo Skill? Or is it damage type and thus Cantarella and Frolova could activate this even without activating their actual Echo Skill? Another one is when attacks hit. Is that any attack? Attack sounds like only basic or heavy attacks to me, which would exclude skill, liberation, echo, metaphor, coordinated, etc. Is this referring to the attack's damage type or the attack's damage source? For instance, Brand's Anchor is a skill cast, but does basic attack damage. Maybe on hit or on dealing X damage type would be more specific. However, I actually had a similar problem recently in Thousand Gateways. The Cyclone Dreamscape metaphor I used said it triggered when a heavy attack hits. So I picked Zani because she does heavy attack damage, but it didn't work. It was triggered specifically on heavy attacks, and not even on special forte heavies like Daybreak, Nightfall, etc. The same is the case for the Meteor metaphor for basic attacks, as Brand's Anchor does not trigger this. Was I stupid for thinking this way, or was there a reason for me thinking this would work? Well, Mortefi's Liberation has always read when the on-field character's basic attack hits the target. However, unlike the above metaphors, this Liberation triggers on damage type, not the source of the damage, like the actual cast or landing the basic attack itself. Crew games, just as an aside, Mortefi is not a bug, please do not fix it. Examples of Mortefi's triggers are Brand's Anchor and Jitra's basic attacks, while Jinxi's Incarnation basic attacks, which deal resonant skill damage, do not trigger Mortefi's Liberation. This is at S0 specifically. I know that later on a sequence node triggers with skill casts as well. The final example of confusing wording was being attacked versus being hit. Was there any difference between these? If I dodge an attack, I was technically still attacked, but I just wasn't hit. However, I think these were both used interchangeably. How do we fix these? Well, we should redefine wording on metaphors, especially be consistent with trigger wordings. For instance, if A, do B, trigger A should be consistent and clear. Being attacked is not the same as being hit, but it seemed that these were potentially used interchangeably, as I mentioned above. It may be helpful to underline each trigger, like on hit, or while in midair, or when attacked, and provide a more detailed description if hovering over it. These keywords should always be consistent, as the point of a keyword is to learn the keyword once and never have to worry about it again. Keywords are common concepts among games, but Magic the Gathering is probably the best example to reference, while Path of Exile 2 is a good example of providing additional information in-game for keywords while hovering over them, although this was already been implemented for lore jargon in this game. I feel Thousand Gateways has improved the wording immensely, however, there are still inconsistencies, such as mentioned above with the Cyclone metaphor and Mortefi's Liberation wording. Just a final quality of life suggestion, allow us to turn on and off auto skip encounter dialogue. That way we don't have to click every time we encounter previously encountered dialogue. This would make reruns much smoother and more enjoyable, particularly when recruiting Verena for the 42nd time. This is an example implementation of what I previously suggested by reducing the number of unnecessary clicks in Dreaming Deep. If the outcome is determined, especially if already previously experienced, then why make me click? Finally, for the last section, let's discuss balancing. Before we discuss the issues, why even worry about balancing? When creating a game mode, it is important to balance each potential strategy as close as possible so there's no clear meta that invalidates other playstyles. As I have mentioned previously, players want their actions to feel like they have an impact, and feeling like you are shoehorned into a particular playstyle invalidates that impact. For Echoes, for example, Crownless was both too strong, when you didn't take any damage, and too weak, you didn't deal any damage at the end of the game mode, even when investing into echo metaphors. This led to players highly preferring Inferno Rider or Turtle, as Resonators had much higher potential than Companion Echoes, and both of these Companion Echoes played off of the Resonator. Therefore, balance each echo for viability. For instance, have Crownless lose energy or duration if you get hit in that mode. If it already did, it wasn't noticeable. That way, even with echo skill cooldowns, you don't have infinite invulnerability. Or, preferably, just have the echo take damage and go on a special cooldown if it dies. Additionally, offer more ways to increase echo damage or usage. It felt like it didn't scale as well as Resonator's damage. This might have been due to too few echo-related metaphors. Speaking of the metaphors, Illusive Realms is a DPS check. Therefore, the Fusion and Glacio metaphors were too strong, giving both the most general damage and survivability. I previously categorized each metaphor by the buff it provides and the condition of the trigger and compared them as shown here, where we see most of the general damage and survivability buffs are red and cyan color coded, this being Fusion and Glacio. My apologies to my colorblind friends for the arrow and Fusion. How do we fix this though? Well, we simply balance the metaphor attributes so that 1, each attribute has a distinct playstyle, and 2, each playstyle can overcome the DPS check, with some general buffs and some more specific buffs. For example, for Fusion, we could have specific buffs related to basic attacks and heavy attacks, be that adding attack, or I guess scaling damage, so for Cartethia that would also be HP, crit rate, crit damage, basic attack percent, specifically to basic or heavy attacks, or for continually attacking. This is kind of how it already was. For Glacio, we could have specific buffs related to survivability. For instance, adding damage percent, crit rate, crit damage for having max HP, or damage scaling while a shield is present, a payoff for defensive play. You could also add defense and HP scaling metaphors in this specific attribute. In my opinion, this was the best balanced at the time. For Electro, we could have specific buffs related to resonance skills and liberations. Specifically, add damage percent scaling bonus based on resonance energy consumed, like the Relief Spring metaphor, or even generated with each skill cast. Crit rate or crit damage, specifically for resonance skills and liberations. Arrow seem to be specific buffs related to Echo or Concerto skills, so specializing into that, buff Echo's damage or frequency significantly if this is to be a viable mode of clearing this content. Maybe even allow Echo companion damage and skills to fill Concerto, so that you can still make use of Concerto companions even while focusing on using Echo skills. A major issue for both Electro and Arrow was that the available companion Echoes had no overlap with Fusion, which has the most general damage and attack scaling attributes. Therefore, trying to run Electro or Arrow attributes to focus on a Liberation skill, Concerto, or Echo playstyle didn't have as many general buffs, and therefore wasn't as strong. I would like to see more nerfs on metaphors as well. As of version 1.4, only one metaphor included a nerf, the Old Revolver. Having more metaphors with trade-offs would help balance the different playstyles mentioned above. This would encourage more theory crafting and specialization to push the crazy builds even further. Example, a metaphor that decreases attack speed for increased damage could pair well with a metaphor that does increase damage the longer you have an attack. The Thousand Gateways has a good example of a new metaphor series that drops health for bonuses. This is a wonderful start. It is important to keep the tokens and metaphors distinct, so as not to create redundant feeling mechanics. Tokens deal with the realm, namely Symphony Rank, Dream Fragment acquisition, room buffs, or summoning outside help, such as with the Serenity of Xiehua Village. Metaphors, on the other hand, deal with the Resonators, the Resonator team, Concerto companions, Echoes, these sorts of things. I recommend collecting information on which metaphors and echoes are selected the most versus how often they are offered, and which are paired the most, if that wasn't already done. This will give information to better balance the metaphors and echoes, as a roguelike mode is a continuous balancing act. For instance, the reliance on Fusion Glacio likely drove a high usage rate of Inferno Rider, the only Fusion Glacio echo. Another concern for balancing are characters. For the most part, characters are fairly well balanced. However, some almost require some specific upgrades, while others feel like certain abilities are favored for available modifiers. For instance, Zani and Jinsi, which require modifications to fill their forte in any reasonable time, allowing them to be played solo. Alternatively, some characters have particularly weak multipliers, such as Verena. Additionally, almost all of Chongli's modifiers revolve around her heavy attack, making her gameplay somewhat uninspired feeling. To fix this, we can normalize every character with a pre-run modification and abide by a convention across all characters for ability modifications. For the pre-run modifications, we can add a slight buff to multipliers for characters such as Verena and Shorekeeper, or for characters like Zani and Jinxie, a nerf to multipliers, but a buff to Forte generation. As for convention ability modifications, each skill could have 3 possible augmentations as follows, that being heavy attacks, skill, Forte, liberation, and intro. The first modification could be a 50% buff to the skill's efficiency, be that damage, shielding, healing, etc. For example, Shangli Yao's cubes could do 50% more damage or steal 50% more time. The second modification could be an alteration of the skill's function or effect that stands alone. For example, Shangli Yao now launches 2 cubes at a time. Or a third modification, which alters the skill's function or effects that interacts with another skill. For example, using skill during liberation recharges 1 cube up to 3. This is an interaction between Shangli Yao's skill and liberation. Perhaps even have multiple enhancements that each interact with a different other ability, but that could be a lot, specifically 5. For interactions between Forte, Liberation, Basic, Heavy, Skill, Intro, yeah, that might be a bit too much. Let's move on. The second to last balancing issue I have is that the Concerto companions were very few and limiting. Straightforward enough to fix though, we just add more Concerto companions. With the added bloat, add a Thought Evolution to reroll companions, reducing the RNG. On the second roll, limit the companion options to within the selected Echo and Resonator attributes, just so we don't brick players' runs. Additionally, Concerto companions need some adjustments so players don't always choose Verena, but may choose another companion to better optimize a specific style of play. For instance, as I had mentioned before, Carlotta using her skill rather than her liberation would probably be much better for a Concerto companion. The last issue I had with Depths of Illusive Realms was the lack of Havoc and Spectro metaphors and Concerto companions. Personally, I would add these attributes based on the following themes. Havoc theme being specific buffs related to debuffing or while an enemy is debuffed, such as increasing stagnation time slightly, increasing freeze time slightly, increasing any buff duration, or buff damage, such as negative status buff damage, or we could increase damage done while enemies are debuffed in some way, be that slowed, frozen, negative status, or while vibration strength is depleted. Additionally, something that didn't sit quite right with me is why was Danjin a fusion Concerto companion, and that's just because there was no Havoc. For the Spectro theme, we could provide weaker but more general buffs. For instance, we steal some of Fusion's metaphors that gave general buffs like increasing crit rate for everything, like the Destroy Silver, and add general metaphors that increase the flat or percent-based attack, defense, and HP across all abilities and all damage. Why was Verena a Glacio? This is the same issue as Danjin, because there was no Spectro. That being said, we could use some more general supports and healers of different attributes. While we have Brant and Cantarella as healers, I'd like to have Brant come in and drop a stagnation anchor, not have him come in and spin for 6 seconds so he slowly heals me. In closing, I would really like to see Depths of Illusive Realms make an actual return. I want to see what sort of modifications Kuro Games makes with the most recent character kits. I want to see what new 4-cost echoes we could play as or alongside. Frolova as Hecate, playing Hecate would be kinda funny. Finally, I want to see how Kuro Games interprets Spectro and Havoc attributes for this mode. With all that said, I will sit back down in the Depths of Illusive Realms waiting room. I hope to see you all on the leaderboard someday. But until then, take care, and as always, keep those cores fed and stable.
Time to get back to work.